Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on Liam Talks Motorsport channel, or as you might know me as, Liam Plutner. Today I'm going to be talking about the tale of one of F1's greatest ever drivers, undoubtedly one of the best to ever win a title. And this driver in question is Gilles Villeneuve. Now you might be wondering why I'm uploading this video on this certain date. So I did a video on my old channel, it no longer exists, last year, where I went through the story of Gilles Villeneuve. And the reason why I did it last year on this day was because it was 38 years at the time since he had passed away, and today's the 39-year anniversary. So today I'm going to be telling you the story of Canada's greatest ever racing driver, and one of, if not North America's greatest ever as well. So, Gilles Villeneuve was born in 1950. He had quite an interesting name. I don't think Gilles was his birth name though, which is quite interesting. But he was born to a French-Canadian family and grew up in Montreal, in that sort of area of Canada. And growing up, just like many others, including myself, he loved motor racing. And he started racing alongside his older brother, Jacques, who he named his son after, in races such as Formula Atlantic. And a certain British world champion called James Hunt decided to enter one of these races one day and saw that Villeneuve was incredibly talented and actually beat Hunt. Hunt gave Teddy Mayer a call to say, look, give him a shot in the old McLaren, because it was actually old McLaren. It was basically Villeneuve was driving like a 1975 car in the 1977 Grand Prix of Britain, and Hunt and his teammate Jochen Mass at the time were driving 1976 or 77 cars, and Villeneuve finished 10th on debut. And that is a fact that not many people know, is that Villeneuve didn't just drive for Ferrari, he actually did a race with McLaren. And yeah, it all began from there. Enzo Ferrari saw how talented he was and invited him to a test at Maranello. So after Villeneuve did the test in Maranello, there were several other drivers that were considered for the role of Ferrari's other driver, because Niki Lauda left the team following a disagreement between the hierarchy at Ferrari and Lauda himself, because he didn't have a certain engineer with him. And there was a couple of options. There was Villeneuve, there was Alan Jones, there was a couple of other drivers, including Jody Scheckter, who'd actually end up driving for Ferrari. And in the end, they went with Villeneuve, which was a choice that they wouldn't really regret. So Villeneuve would be Carlos Reutemann's teammate for the 1978 season, and it wasn't a brilliant season for him, but by the end of the season he showed how good he was by becoming the first ever Canadian winner and the first winner around the El Notre Dame circuit, which would later be renamed in his honour as the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, what we know as today as the Canadian Grand Prix, of course, in Montreal. In 1979 though, the package was completely different. Lotus had won the championship the previous year, and Brabham were on the tail of them, but both of them struggled in 79, and it looked like there would be three teams by the end of the season that were battling out for race wins, and one of them happened to be Ferrari. Now for this season, the three teams that could have won the title were Williams, who had Alan Jones and Clay Regazzoni. Ligier had an all-French lineup with Jacques Lafitte and Patrick Depailler, and Ferrari had Gilles Villeneuve and Jody Scheckter. And it went right down to the wire between Scheckter and Villeneuve as to who was going to win the title. And Scheckter mostly won it because of a couple of retirements more that Villeneuve had. And as a result, Scheckter became the first ever African F1 champion, and Villeneuve missed the chance to be the first ever Canadian F1 champion. And unfortunately, he would never get that chance again in his career. On to the following year, 1980, the Ferrari car was not that great. So much so that Scheckter, who was the reigning world champion at the time, could not even qualify for a race. Ferrari, for one race, only had one car entering, just like at the start of 1970. But that's for a different video. But in 1981, the package was better, and it was around about the same car performance level as 1978's was, in terms of where it was in the field and how far apart it was from the leaders, who were Brabham and Williams. But when Villeneuve drove in that Ferrari in 78, he was new to F1, he was inexperienced, and his teammate was much more experienced than him. But this time, it was vice versa. because his new teammate, because Scheckter announced his retirement from Formula 1, Villeneuve's new teammate would be Didier Pironi, who had already taken a race win the previous year with the
Ligier team
at the Belgian Grand Prix, and Villeneuve dominated him. I think that's the best way to put it. Villeneuve absolutely dominated Pironi. And in that season, Villeneuve took his final 2 wins in Monaco and in Spain and had some absolutely incredible drives, because that car was only good enough to be midfield, and yet he managed to hold off the McLarens, Ligiers, the Williams cars, and win the race. His performance in Spain was especially good because he managed to hold off a massive queue of cars behind him for more than 40 laps of the race, which was, I mean, Jarama, which is in Madrid, by the way, was a difficult track to pass around, but 40 laps of defending non-stop was incredible. And even then, I haven't even talked about some of his best performances, like the 1979 French Grand Prix, when him and the Renault of René Arnoux battled away for second place on the last lap of the Grand Prix, constantly hitting each other. Bang, 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 wheel bang.
And who can forget when he was 11 seconds quicker than anyone else in a practice session in the rain? Incredible.
And that's the thing. The winner of the race got overshadowed because of the huge battle that happened for second, which Villeneuve eventually won. And that yet again showed his determination, his grit, his pace, and how committed he was, and how hard charging he was in his Formula 1 career. There was one instance where he got like a double puncture in his car and his tyres were ruined, and he kept pushing the limit of the car and spun multiple times on the way to the pits. That described Villeneuve's personality in a nutshell. In the 1982 season, it didn't get off to a good start for him. Not only because Pironi beat him, but because him and Pironi had, to put it simply, a rivalry which would not be resolved. It was like Prost and Senna in a way. It would have been Prost and Senna, but heading into the Belgian Grand Prix, just 2 weeks after the San Marino Grand Prix, which was very controversial because of what happened between Villeneuve and Pironi, because Villeneuve and Pironi were battling away for the lead, and there was some sort of gentleman's agreement that Villeneuve would win the race, but Pironi was not having any of it and won the race in the end, and Villeneuve never spoke to him for the rest of his life. Even on the podium after the race, you can tell there's like photographs across the internet of Villeneuve just looking so sad after the race, looking betrayed. Meanwhile, Pironi spraying the champagne into the Italian Tifosi crowd. In Belgium, in Zolder, Villeneuve was trying to outpace Pironi, but due to how blind some of the corners are around Zolder, they're downhill chicanes, a bit like the old Hockenheim layout, he couldn't see the arrows of Jochen Mass. Well, he could see him, but there was a miscommunication between them both. It was like Jean-Louis Schlesser and Senna, but it was so much worse. Because Mass thought that Villeneuve was going to go on the left, and as a result, he turned in right. When in actual fact, Villeneuve was turning in right, and Villeneuve hit the back of him, and his car went over the top of him. And the even worse circumstances of it were, there was no safety at that time, so there was only one place he could really go, and that was the catch fencing. And when I mean he, I mean Villeneuve. The body of him flew, his body flew out of the car and landed on the catch fencing, and Derek Warwick and John Watson had to get him off of the catch fencing, but by then he had already broken his neck and he had already lost consciousness, and he was left with a widow and 2 kids. And we all know who one of his kids
is.
The devastating circumstances of his death were, it's really difficult to go into. After his death, Jody Scheckter helped the family with their finances because he felt like it was the right thing to do. And in the end, Gilles' son, Jacques, went into motor racing himself, not only won the Indianapolis 500, which is a famous race in America, one of, if not the most famous race in the world, he became Formula 1 world champion. And that was only because of his dad's legacy. Gilles' legacy will never be forgotten in Formula 1. Enzo Ferrari, one of his last ever drivers, was Villeneuve when he was alive. in a way. And he said that he reminded him of Tazio Nuvolari, who Enzo worked with and was very close to for many years. And he called him a piccolo Canadinese, the little Canadian in Italian. Enzo had deep respect for him, but didn't really get involved with the family after his death, and as a result, Jacques ended up driving for Ferrari's arch rivals by the late 90s Williams, and we all know how that turned out, so yeah. But anyway, thank you all for watching this video on Gilles Villeneuve. I hope you enjoyed it. Going through the history of the late Gilles Villeneuve, who passed away on this day 39 years ago at the Circuit Zolder, which actually is only a few miles away from where Max Verstappen was born. So yeah, that's a fact for you. Yeah, thank you all for watching. Rest in peace, Gilles. Salut, Gilles. Salut.